So, without further ado, can I want to Professor Siobhan.
Thank you so much. My glasses, you're right. You are right. We'll go about the glasses in order. Okay, so it's brilliant to be here, and thanks so much. Thanks so much for the invitation. Is that better now? Is it? Yeah. Good stuff. Okay, so I'm going to be talking for the next 20 minutes about men's mental health in general, and a wee bit about Northern Ireland and some of the differences and some of the things we might not really be aware of when it comes to male mental health and men's mental health. So what a pleasure to have an opportunity to speak to you all on men's health week. It's good. So starting off with our circuits of survival, everybody has this, and I usually start these talks with just a reminder that at the end of the day we're animals, we're governed by our biology, and we have these circuits of survival that influence our survival over generations, and have left us as we are as human beings, are able to respond and survive in the world that we live in. So mental health, first of all, is about our response to stress, our stress response. So whenever we're threatened, whenever we have that fear activation, there's a part of the brain called the hypothalamic pituitary axis that gets activated, and that results in changes in how we feel and how we behave. So it's about threat from the outside, and then how our body responds to that threat, and that's basically what keeps us alive and stops us from getting killed or eaten and stopped our ancestors certainly from getting killed. So we're here because we have this, and it's a really important part of who we are as human beings. And what we want to be most of the time is in that safe and social place in the middle where we can engage and our stress systems aren't activated. But it's very, very normal that when we feel under threat, we go up into fight or flight and we go down into shutdown. Whenever we're traumatized, whenever we have a shock or a threat. So you'll all be familiar with the fight or flight response to stress. We're mobilized, vigilant, aggressive, avoidant. We shout, we want to run away, we get angry. And that's our stress response. Shutdown happens whenever there's something overwhelming. It can be defined as a trauma response. We become frozen, we become numb, we become disconnected. And we sink right down. So fight or flight is normal. It's what gets us up in the morning, what gets us out to our work, what gets the kids out to school in the morning, and helps us do what we want to do. So this is not to say that stress is harmful in any way. It's a natural response, but too much of it can be dangerous and can affect our feelings and behaviours in such a way that causes us problems. So safe and social fight or flight shutdown. And the main point is that it affects how we feel and how we behave. So mental health and mental illness, it's biological, it's about that biological stress response. And it's also psychological because how our body reacts impacts, as I say, how we feel and how we behave in response to those feelings, thoughts and feelings. And then it's also about our relationships as well. It's about our connections as human beings. Whenever I was studying health psychology years ago, we were told that it was biopsychosocial. It was biological, psychological, and also social. And now I would use the phrase relational rather than social because the relationships are so important. They're fundamental to this. We know from the whole field of community neuroscience that our brains are wired to work together. So we can see it whenever you see a baby and a parent. The child's cries elicit a response in that parent that means that they react and attend to the child's needs. And it's also a physical response as well. It's very much the relationship between the parent and child and crucial to good mental health. But it's not just that physical response between a parent and a child, it's how we respond to each other within our communities as well. It's being able to regulate, we co-regulate with other members of our community, with our family, and that's what keeps us safe and well. In the pandemic, when we had to separate from our communities and sometimes even from our families, it was very, very, very stressful because we're not designed to live in isolation. So we're pack animals, and when you separate an animal from its pack, it gets scared because it doesn't feel safe. So the relationships are absolutely huge, and the social context is a huge part of that. So biological, our body stress response, psychological, how we think because the stress response affects both of those things. It allows us to respond to the threat. And then our relationships keep us safe, but also our relationships are the things that can cause us most stress as well. So last year, I've been working with Nicole, who you know, and you know her dad too, Michael, who's leading this conference. And what we were doing is we put questions into the Northern Ireland Life and Time survey around this stuff. And we put questions in about our attitudes to mental health and mental illness to try and find out what members of the public know about mental health and mental illness, and what their perceptions were about this stuff. And our questions asked about attitudes towards asking for help, and thankfully most people now know that asking for help for your mental health is not something that you should be ashamed of. It's really important that you do that, and it's certainly not something that's wrong. So that first bar there is 91% of people felt that it was okay to ask for help for your mental health. And again, 78% in the next column, that's the number of people feel that there's less of a stigma around asking for help for an emotional and mental health problem. The third one is about people who are socially disadvantaged. They're more at risk of having poor mental health. And it's important that we know that social disadvantage is stressful. It adds an extra layer of stress. So we want to increase that 74%. We want to bring that right up to 100 so that everybody realises that social disadvantage is important to mental health. But the next one is the one I wanted to draw your attention to today. So I talked about feelings and emotions, and it's important that we know mental health is about our feelings and emotional responses. But lots of people find it difficult to talk about those feelings to other people. And 40% of women had difficulties discussing feelings, and 49% of men had difficulty talking about their feelings. And talking about your feelings is so, so important, because that change, that shift in the fight or flight to trauma response changes how we feel. And we can get help with that, and if we address those feelings, those signals, then we can get ourselves back into that safe and social. So what we're trying to do with emotional regulation is to move from fight or flight back into safe and social. And that's where we can do our best stuff. Really, that's where we can engage and connect it. So talking about our feelings is really important to all of us, because stress affects how we feel. And feelings are signals, they're data that we need to respond to. And by talking about our feelings, we're making those relational connections, and we're helping ourselves regulate, get back into safe and social, and address the cause of those feelings. And yet it's so sad that a lot of us are unable to talk about how we feel. And more men than women have difficulty with that. And one of the other things we found in this survey was that actually the proportion of the population who had difficulty talking about how they feel had increased since 2015. It was actually higher. So we're shutting down. We know it's okay to talk about our mental health, right? We've got that. But what about our feelings? Because our feelings that's where it all starts. It starts with how we feel and how we behave. So these are really important messages. We've got the message about mental health, yes, but have we got the message that we should actually be tuning into how we feel and responding to those feelings as a way of protecting our mental health? Because it's nearly like it's too late whenever you develop a mental health problem. And I would define having a mental health problem as being stuck in fight or flight all the time. Having so much stress, we're stuck up there in that anxious state where we're mobilised, we're ready to run or shout or get angry, we're there all the time. That's really what an anxiety disorder is. And that's the most common mental health problem, is an anxiety disorder, when we're kind of stuck in fight or flight all the time. We're always on high alert. It's really bad for our bodies, but it's also really bad in terms of how we feel, how we relate, and how we behave. And then depression would be like that shutdown state where we're frozen, numb, disconnected all the time. But all this stuff starts with our feelings, you know, how we feel. And if we can tune into those feelings, then we can resolve a lot of this. So that's one of the things that I wanted to mention in terms of men's mental health. It starts with not necessarily talking about your mental health, but talking about how you feel, and talking to other people, and getting those relationships and co-regulating together, talking about feelings. The last bit there was mental health problems can be prevented before they happen, and they absolutely can be prevented before they happen, particularly if we talk about our feelings and if we look at our behaviours in response to those feelings, and if we connect with each other, and again, nearly half the population didn't, we half strongly agree there, but the other half weren't sure or disagreed that we can prevent mental health problems. And that's quite sad. So I wanted to bring some stats to the picture. This is a study that was conducted just prior to the pandemic, back in 2019, on young people's mental health. It was published in 2020, but it certainly was prior to the pandemic. And it's a really good picture of how our young people are. So what we found with our young people, 1 in 8 of our young people meet the criteria for a mood or anxiety disorder. So they're stuck in fight or flight, they're stuck in that shutdown where they're disconnected and depressed. That's what a mood disorder is. Their mood has adjusted away from that safe and social, calm, connected place. And actually, we know, all the literature would say with gears, we know women have more mental health problems. It depends on what type of mental health problem you're talking about. And 1 in 8 generally, it's 12% of boys and 13% of girls, so that's not a big difference there. But in terms of the internalising and externalising disorders, we can see that males respond differently to females. So boys are more likely to externalise, men are more likely to externalise. So we've got the feelings, but the behaviours look different. For women, it's rumination, they turn inwards. Men get angry, more likely to act outwards, more likely to harm themselves, much more likely to die by suicide, of course. 75% of the deaths are by suicide. And these externalising problems are evident in young people as well. 1 in 10 young people have externalising issues. And I would be really concerned that boys' externalising behaviours in schools are not managed well, they're not managed appropriately, they're not recognised as a response to feelings. The feelings aren't looked at, it's the behaviours. The behaviours are managed in such a way that it actually makes them feel worse. So they're excluded. The relational connections are broken. They're put out of the class, they're put out of the school. Relationships are so important. In schools, it's the relationships between the kids themselves, it's the leadership in the school, the relationship between the teacher and the young people. It's so important to keeping everybody safe and social and calm and connected. Yet in response to boys externalising, in response to their negative feelings, they become disconnected and the relationships are fractured further. And this study actually showed that boys aged 5 to 10, young boys, have significantly higher rates of mental health problems than girls, first signs of mental health problems. So 8.5% compared to 2.8% in that age group. Now the girls catch up, the girls get worse as they get older, but the boys 5 to 10 years are really, really high. You can see all the figures there: social anxiety disorder, generalised anxiety disorder, panic disorder. So we have very young boys really suffering and struggling in primary schools, and we're not getting it. The help's not there from them. And it is about looking at how they behave and those externalising behaviours and how they're managed within the family and within the school. So these are just the little bar charts to show you the difference. So that's the social anxiety, very high in the boys. And the girls, it's low and it gets higher. Generalised anxiety disorder, very high. And males are on the left-hand side there. And then the females increase. And this is all from that report. And yet very, very few people actually know about this data and that it's out there. Same for panic disorder, same for OCD. So I would be asking, what are we doing in the classrooms, in the schools, to help these young boys? You will know that child adversities are the main cause of mental health problems. Adversities in childhood impact on those circuits of survival and the thresholds that we hit, the fight or flight. So if you have a child who has a lot of stress and trauma, their threshold for activation will be lowered, and they'll rise up into fight or flight more quickly if they have a lot of trauma. Because it's like the brain saying, hang on a minute, this child needs to be in high alert all the time to survive. And childhood adversities are just the same in girls and boys. And that's the 11 to 15 years and the 16 to 19 years there. And you can see that the proportions are roughly the same. Thankfully, most of our young people don't have any childhood adversities, but males and females, they collect them along the way. So when I'm talking about an awareness of men's mental health difficulties, there's 3 aspects to it, and this is where I'm hoping that this all comes together a wee bit for you. So it's first of all about identifying and discussing feelings, not necessarily mental health, because when we talk about mental health, we've all the scary stories in the news about mental health patients and what they do, and the stigma around that. It's absolutely huge. For somebody to say, I have a mental health problem, it's still stigmatized. And we need to take a step back and say, well, I feel bad today. I'm anxious today. My stress systems have been activated, and I'm sort of stuck up there because of whatever. And we need to be able to connect with other people to regulate that. So it's not just to find a solution, but just sharing it can take the heat out of it, can help us get back into that safe and social place. But it starts with how are we feeling? How are we really feeling? What's that feeling? Putting a name on it, label on it. And that's the first. So when we name it to tame it, as they say, you put a name on the emotion, and then you can start to take control of it and start to problem solve it. So I will move away a wee bit from let's talk about how we feel rather than our mental health. Because by the time we're stuck up on high alert or shut down, depressed, and maybe even suicidal, that's where we need somebody else to help us get everything together with our bodies. And at that stage it will become looking at our exercise levels, our physical activity, our sleep, our relational connections, yes, and even what we eat. All of those things can impact our body's stress response. But if we could start with identifying and discussing those feelings, particularly in classrooms, and recognising that behaviours are a result of feelings. The child that lashes out, gets angry. What's the feeling that has led to that behaviour? Now sometimes it's attention seeking, or they're performing, I have a 6-year-old, so I know all about this crap. It's not always, that they're feeling really bad. They could be just doing something to get attention. But there's always something underlying that, and that's what we need to be looking at. And even ourselves, how are we feeling today? And tuning into those feelings. And that's what meditation, mindfulness, CBT, thoughts, feelings, behaviours. Early intervention, recognising the signs of dysregulation. What does dysregulation look like when those circuits are messed up? What is that? How does it look? And where can we start? And sometimes the first place we start is by getting a bit of exercise to manage all the jiggly feelings and the chemicals that are released that are giving us the flight part of it and the fight part of it. So getting to grips with those and getting rid of those so that we can regulate back and talk about what has led to the feeling and led to the behaviour. And then finally it's about treatment, and sometimes it's about challenging the stereotypes and the stigma and recognising that any one of us with enough stress, especially if we've had a lot of childhood stress which has messed with that calibration, it's messed with our thresholds. So our settings are a little bit different from other people. So we react more quickly, we're more jumpy, we're fiery. Or maybe we shut down, we disconnect more easily because of something that's happened to us, new triggers, or big triggers. Trauma triggers that have happened, things that have happened to us when we were babies and children. We maybe don't even remember, but our body remembers it, and the triggers are there, and our brain's wise to it. So we need to challenge the stereotypes and the stigma, particularly around those externalising behaviours and what they look like in classrooms and families, and how we respond to that as well. And we need to make sure that we have mental health services that people can access, that don't create more stigma for people whenever they find they're stuck in states of anxiety or depression, and they need a bit of help to get out of those states as well. So what is my role in all of this? We do have a mental health strategy. I've been working along with so many other people to develop a plan for mental health services that will create a single regional service where everybody can access treatment, the kind of treatment that will work, where there's no wrong door, where people can get help when they're in a crisis, when they're in a state of crisis, when they're impulsive, when they might engage in self-harm, externalising behaviour in response to a crisis, and where they can get treatment for severe mental illness, and where we can start to reduce the levels of adversities in families. We help parents with what they do. So theme one there is really important, promoting well-being, promoting emotional intelligence, where we can recognise how we're feeling and get help to address those feelings and help ourselves if that's, if that's something we can do as well. So that's a mental health strategy, and we're working on all the 35 actions. They are progressing, and now the big challenge is to make sure that this is funded and that there's a unified approach, that the whole strategy is funded, particularly workforce, because simply setting up a service without the workforce means that people come from other parts of the service and you've gaps. And I'm seeing the impact of that now, and it's really hard. So that's what I'm about. Hopefully it can take some questions, and hopefully that made sense in the end. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Siobhan. We might take probably just one or two questions. Anybody can shout out. Anybody game for a question? Sorry, go ahead.
Is it, your strategy, are you going to stop the GPs being gatekeepers of everything?
Yes and no. We're going to provide, GPs still need to be, they're still the main, in the absence of complete reform of the whole system, you've got a setup where GPs are there and they're their point of contact. So in terms of babies and families and health visitors, who are all really, really important to the whole mental health picture, we can't move away from GP surgeries. It's like saying, can you get rid of the trusts as well? That's another thing that, we can't change the whole system, but we can set up alternative points of entry into mental health services. So they're setting up CAMS teams in schools, so you have workers in schools that can directly refer people, so you don't need to go through the GP practice. The other thing is like the high street cafe model, where young people can access help in a cafe and in the high street, so we don't need to go through the GP. So, but we need, the multidisciplinary teams where they're happening seem to really happen well. Problem is they're taking staff away from other parts of the mental health service. But the idea of having a mental health worker in your GP practice, you can get an appointment, they can assess you and get you into the right part of the system. That needs to be maintained. So it includes GPs, but it goes well beyond that. I don't know, is that how you hoped, or what do you think?
I just feel that that's a stumbling block for a lot of people.
Yeah.
They just can't get to a GP service, so therefore everything else that could follow on from that just isn't available to them because they can't get an appointment or whatever. It ought to be funded. From the outside, it appears ought to be funded through the GP service. And when there's a blockage in that, everything else falls apart. If there's other ways of accessing services, that's great.
There's loads, but what we need is a community and voluntary sector to be, GPs need to be able to refer people to the C&B sector already, because we have people going straight to the C&B sector, going straight to private providers, and we just don't know what they're doing, So it's got to be bringing everything together. But GP, there is a crisis in primary care at the minute, and the workforce just isn't there. But in many practices, there are mental health workers in GP practices. And the work that health visitors and midwives are doing in GP practices, that's mental health work. And that's prevention work, so it will never come away completely from primary care, but we just need the workforce thing sorted out. And we need the cafes, and we need the schools, we need all that stuff for schools. Teams are vital as well.
I'm sorry to voice question, but do you mind if I ask you this?
Work away, yeah.
This is just on your relation when you said about community voluntary sector.
Yeah.
We know, particularly trying to do men's work in the wider context, that we have great difficulty in doing it and resourcing it, because we found at governmental level there's nothing there to task government departments to do it. And so we were asking and have asked repeatedly for a men's health policy. That I know your policy would supersede that and it should be for all, but we've been trying to advocate for many years at government level for resources for the type of work you're talking, particularly that emotional well-being, which is a core of our work and our work, that we need spaces for men to have those kind of conversations, but they're not there and they're not being resourced. And I say that in the climate of the current cuts, so we acknowledge that as well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The theme one of the mental health strategy, early intervention and prevention, includes the plan for early intervention and prevention, and there's various different elements of that that are being rolled out. And men's health will be in there as well, you know. But the mobilisation of the community and voluntary sector, there's going to be an exercise to bring together all of the groups so that we can have that equity and bring them into the mental health service. But yeah, it's really difficult. The mental health strategy is good on that stuff. I would argue we do need those other strategies as well because it goes beyond mental health. The mental health strategy is one department, it's Department of Health. You know, so it doesn't cover education, there are links, but it doesn't cover justice. It's a big one as well. You know, a lot of stuff I'm saying relates to the justice system and people who are in contact with the justice system too. So I couldn't agree more. We just need to keep working through the actions of the strategy that has been signed off. In the absence of anything else, and just keep going, say, well, you know, which action there, let's keep moving. That's kind of what my goal is. But I feel your pain, like it's really disheartening, you know. Yeah.
Thank you.